London, 1798. On a quiet street, not far from the London Wall, there's a modest apartment, easily overlooked by those who walk past. No one stops to think who lives there, or what happens behind its closed doors. Yet beneath the apartment, there's a cellar, and in the cellar rests a machine that harnesses the power of pneumatic chemistry, magnetism, and mesmerism. Its purpose is to control the mind and body of any person subjected to its influence, and it's called the Air Loom. Schizophrenia is a mental disorder characterized by disruptions in thought processes, emotional responsiveness, and social interactions. Most people lack a clear understanding of the disorder. It hadn't even been properly distinguished until the early 1900s. Before then, it was known as dementia praecox, meaning premature dementia. Psychiatrist Eugen Bleuler introduced the distinction, and with the criteria for a proper diagnosis, psychiatrists could retrospectively examine historical accounts of delusion and accurately identify them as schizophrenia. Among these was one particularly notable case, a man now regarded as the earliest documented individual with paranoid schizophrenia. His experiences gave rise to the concept of the influencing machine. This man was James Tilly Matthews. Matthews was born in 1770 into a family of tea merchants. The tea trade attracted political activists who supported progressive causes such as liberty, the rights of man, and the abolition of slavery, beliefs that Matthews held himself. So when the French Revolution began in 1789, he strongly supported it. In Britain, where Matthews lived most of his life, opinion on the revolution was divided. Some opposed the revolution, viewing it as a threat to monarchy and religion, while others supported it as a movement promoting liberty. By the early 1790s, tensions were rising between Britain and France. Concerned at the possibility of war, Matthews traveled to France with his mentor David Williams with the intention to act as mediators between the two countries. Ultimately, Williams failed, but Matthews wasn't going to give up. He continued with his peace proposals, acting as a messenger between the British and French governments. He even gained the trust of the French for a short period of time. However, by 1793, Matthews had fallen under suspicion of being a double agent. He was arrested and imprisoned in France, where he would remain for the next 3 years. The experience was deeply traumatic. It was the height of the terror, and revolutionaries were executing people by the hundreds. Each day, Matthews awoke uncertain if he would be next to face the guillotine. Fortunately, he was released in 1796, and after returning home to Britain, he began to write letters to the British government claiming they had abandoned him to the enemy. He received no reply, and he was left with limited options. So in December of the same year, he interrupted a debate in the House of Commons and accused the government minister of treason. As a result, he was arrested, determined to be a lunatic, and confined to Bedlam Mental Hospital. It's unclear exactly when Matthews began to experience delusions. It may have been while he was imprisoned in France. He struggled to understand why he had been abandoned to the enemies, and even after returning to England, he wasn't treated any better. It's possible that his delusions began as a mechanism to rationalize his mistreatment. Rather than accepting betrayal by those within the British government, Matthews concluded that government officials were being psychologically manipulated. This reasoning ultimately led him to conceive the idea of the Air Loom. The Air Loom was a fabrication of Matthews' mind. He believed it could control any person it targeted, causing both physical and mental effects. According to him, the machine combined pneumatic chemistry, also known as gas chemistry, with mesmerism, the idea that all living things possess an invisible, magnetic-like force. It used a list of ingredients, including male and female seminal fluid, fumes of copper, fumes of sulfur, vapors from nitric acid, vapors from nightshade, odors from dogs, stinking human breath, decomposing matter, odors from plague-infested bodies, gas from a horse's anus, gas from a human's anus, fumes of arsenic, poison from toads, and fragrances from rose and carnation oils. The machine could produce various effects depending on the substances combined and the magnetic pulse emitted. Certain effects were more dangerous than others, and some were even lethal. These included fluid locking, the restriction of fibers at the root of the tongue which impede the ability to speak, cutting soul from sense, a sensation across the underside of the brain which separates emotion from reason so that feelings cannot connect with thoughts, stone making, the remote production of bladder stones in a chosen victim, thigh talking, the manipulation of a victim so that their sense of hearing is located in their thigh, kiting, the act of implanting a specific thought into a victim's mind, stomach skinning, making the stomach feel raw, as if its inner lining has been stripped off, lengthening the brain, the elongation of one's brain, distorting thoughts and causing the victim to question their own beliefs, brain sayings, a form of thought sharing that isn't heard out loud, but rather directly transmitted into the mind, laugh making, forcing magnetic fluid into vital organs, causing the victim to uncontrollably laugh, bladder filling, filling the nerves of the neck with gas, causing continuous pressure that partially dislocates the brain. Frequent repetition of this effect results in mental impairment. Gas plucking, extracting magnetic fluid from a victim's anus by using suction from the air loom. Apoplexy working with the nutmeg grater, aggressively forcing fluids into the head, which, if does not immediately kill the victim, results in small raised pimples on the temple that fade away over a few days. Lobster cracking, applying external pressure through the magnetic atmosphere surrounding the victim. This causes circulation to halt, vital functions to stop, and results in immediate death. Bomb bursting, fluid in the brain, vapor in the blood vessels, and gas in the stomach become highly pressurized, creating painful swelling throughout the body. When the victim is suffering from this pressure, the attackers discharge a powerful electric shock, which triggers a violent internal explosion. This results in severe damage throughout the body and possibly even death. There were many more effects like foot curving, spark exploding, and knee nailing, but their impacts were never fully explained. It should be restated that these were all fabrications of Matthew's mind, and even though the heirloom did not exist, he described it in such detail that refuting him became extremely difficult. He knew exactly how the machine functioned, and even created a drawing depicting each of its components. It was shaped like a large table, with a seating area for the operators. There were pedals at the base, and large levers on either side that were used to attack the victim. Keys, resembling piano keys, opened valves to release magnetic fluid through tubes. And above the keys were metal handles that were used to block the signal from affecting the victim. A group of upright tubes were described by Matthews as musical glasses, but he later learned through an encyclopedia that this was called a battery. Beside this were barrels believed to supply poisonous or magnetic gases into the machine, and on top of the heirloom stood pillars that presumably extended outside. However, the pillars led somewhere out of Matthew's sight, preventing him from discerning the full structure. Of course, the machine required an operator, and Matthews knew exactly who took part in the operation. It was a crew of 7 French revolutionaries, 4 men and 3 women. They each had their own particular role, some more important than others, but they all served one purpose: to manipulate, control, and torture Matthews. He called them the Air Loom Gang. Their leader was named Bill, but the crew called him the King. He was said to be the most skilled and precise operator of the machine, but also the most murderous and ruthless. According to Matthews, several notable figures of the 18th century were influenced by the heirloom while under the King's operation. This included the London Monster, a man who attacked dozens of women while wielding a knife, and James Hadfield, the man who attempted to assassinate George III. The next in command was called Jack the Schoolmaster. He was the shorthand writer of the gang and called himself the Recorder. He was a tall, 60-year-old man with a mocking, sarcastic demeanor, However, Jack rarely operated the machine. He would save that work for the lower levels of the crew. The third member of the group is Sir Archie, a 55-year-old man who wears old-fashioned attire. Some of the gang suggest that he's actually a woman disguised in men's clothing. He's considered to be the common liar of the gang, a vulgar, low-minded person who constantly tells dirty jokes. He almost always stays in the cellar, but claims that he never operates the machine. The last male in the group is called the Middleman. He's about 57 years old, average in height, and with a hawk-like facial structure. It's said that he builds heirlooms and is highly skilled in its operation. He's almost always the one using the machine. He treats it like a game, grinning and smiling while he relentlessly torments Matthews. The first of the females is a woman named Augusta. She's about 36 years old with a sharp-featured face. She's neither fat nor thin and usually dresses plainly, often wearing black clothing. Augusta rarely operates the machine, but she often travels to communicate with other gangs in other parts of London. At first, she appears friendly and flattering, but if she realizes that she can't influence or persuade someone, her attitude quickly turns spiteful and bitter. Her main role is to influence women through brain sayings, and she claims to be the leader of this part of their operation. The next woman is Charlotte. She's about the same age as Augusta, also with average height. She stays in the cellar with Sir Archie and says she's being held there against her will. She's kept naked and poorly fed. Matthews believes she might be chained, as she says she's just as much of a prisoner as Matthews is. She hasn't operated the machine in years. Instead, she works as a reporter for the gang. And while she knows that what she's doing is wrong, she says there's nothing that she can do about it. The last of the group is a rather malicious woman. She doesn't have a name, but instead is known by the gang as the Glove Woman. She's 48 years old and taller than average. There's a noticeable amount of hair on her chin and upper lip. She always wears cotton gloves, hence her name, and is known for her exceptional skill in operating the machine. The rest of the gang, particularly Sir Archie, constantly banter at her, but she has never been known to speak. The heirloom has limitations in how it can operate. It can only affect people who have been saturated with magnetic fluid. This means that the Air Loom Gang has to prepare their targets with a process called hand impregnation. The gang would send out agents, called novices, with a bottle of magnetic fluid that releases its contents when a valve is pressed. The novice has to get close to their target, so they often strike up a conversation. During this time, they release the fluid, which the target then breathes in without realizing. The human body is strongly drawn to the fluid, causing the person to become impregnated. This leaves them susceptible to control, allowing the gang to manipulate them using the magnetic forces of the heirloom. Since Matthews is the main victim, the gang implanted a magnet directly into his head. Without this implant, they would have to regularly refresh the magnetic fluid, a procedure necessary for maintaining the heirloom's effectiveness. It was possible to influence targets without having to hand impregnate them, although this method offered limited control over their victim. To do this, a magnetically prepared, skilled member of the gang would simply stand near their target, allowing them to read the person's mind and implant specific thoughts. This method would be used with British government ministers. Their thoughts and opinions on matters like peace negotiations, trade relations, or military preparations would be extracted and passed on to the enemy. This was the riskiest operation for the gang as they had to operate in person. However, they carried magnetic metal batons that, if grasped, would fog the minds of anyone in close proximity, allowing them time to escape if suspicion had been raised. It wasn't only the British government affected by the heirloom. There were dozens of gangs spread all throughout Europe, maintaining a firm grasp on France, Prussia, and several other countries. Matthews, being one of the only people aware of the gangs, became one of their biggest targets. He was the most resilient to the heirloom's effects, and was so committed to opposing the gang that he would continue fighting them even if it cost him his life. One might ask, if the heirloom is to be kept a secret, and the Air Loom Gang has the means to maintain its secrecy, then how is Matthews so knowledgeable in how it functions and how the gang operates? The answer lies in the shared magnetic fluid that both Matthews and members of the gang contain. It created what could be called a sympathetic perception. When Matthews was under the heirloom's attack, right at the point he was falling under its control. He could see the cellar. He could see the gang laughing at him, taunting him. To them, his suffering was a spectacle, and there was nothing he could do to stop them. After Matthews was determined to be a lunatic, he was confined to Bedlam Mental Hospital and placed under supervision of John Haslam, an apothecary at the facility. He believed that his confinement was orchestrated by the Air Loom Gang. They wanted to make him appear insane so that nobody listened to what he said. While it may not have been the gang that kept him imprisoned, there was incentive from powerful people to keep him in Bedlam. Having worked closely with the British government during the French Revolution, Matthews was aware of government secrets that they did not want to be released. The hospital received letters from the Home Secretary requesting that Matthews would continue to be held there. Simultaneously, Matthews' family was attempting to free him from the hospital, arguing that he was not actually insane. They claimed that he had been unlawfully imprisoned, prompting the court to appoint 2 doctors to examine him and assess his mental state. When Matthews wasn't talking about the Air Loom, he was known to be intelligent, articulate, and a very gentle person. Even in Bedlam, when conflict arose between patients, he would take the role of the mediator, just as he did for Britain and France. Ultimately, the doctors determined that Matthews was, in fact, perfectly sane. However, Haslam, the apothecary that was responsible for Matthews, strongly disagreed. He insisted that Matthews' delusions, especially those concerning political issues, posed a danger to both public officials and to society as a whole. But Haslam had ulterior motives. He aspired to become a specialist mad doctor, a physician entirely devoted to studying the insane. Naturally, to achieve this, he required specimens of madness, and Matthews was exactly the type of patient he needed. Unfortunately, this meant that Matthews wouldn't be leaving Bedlam anytime soon. Either way, Haslam was angry at the doctor's diagnosis. To him, Matthews' insanity was clear. This led him to write Illustrations of Madness, the first full study of a single psychiatric patient in medical history. It included a first-hand account of Matthews' delusions, taken from notes he wrote while in Bedlam. If it weren't for Haslam, Matthews' case would likely have been lost to time. But once again, Haslam's intentions were not to preserve his story. He wanted to disprove the doctors who had diagnosed Matthews and demonstrate his own competence as a mad doctor. As a matter of fact, he showed little regard for Matthews and was known to treat him quite harshly. Matthews would regularly question the authority of Haslam, and in retaliation to this, Haslam would handcuff and leg lock Matthews. This was punishment that Matthews had to endure for over 2 years. His family continued to petition for his release, as his health was declining, and the state at which he was held in Bedlam was certain to end his life. The hospital surgeon even stated that Matthews would not survive another winter if he continued to be confined. In 1814, after spending 17 years in Bedlam, Matthews was finally transferred to a private asylum, half at the expense of Bedlam and half at the expense of his friends. He quickly became a trusted patient, assisting with the bookkeeping and gardening at the facility. Samuel Fox, a doctor at the institution, stated that Matthews was sane, once again contradicting Haslam's long-standing diagnosis. Matthews remained at the new asylum for less than a year, and in January of 1815, he passed away. Haslam subjected Matthews to such poor conditions that he was left permanently damaged. Several Bedlam staff members later acknowledged that Matthews did not deserve such treatment. However, Haslam ultimately held the authority to dictate Matthews' care. In 1815, a select committee was established to improve the regulation of madhouses in Britain. They investigated several cases throughout various asylums, and Matthews' case happened to be one of them. At this point, Matthews had passed away, but his nephew, Richard Stavely, was called in and examined on behalf of his uncle. Stavely detailed the conditions that Matthews faced, and noted that Haslam held animosity toward Matthews without any apparent justification. Ultimately, the committee determined that Bedlam subjected its patients to mistreatment, citing excessive use of physical restraint, lack of proper medical supervision, poor living conditions, and various other forms of neglect. The committee's report led to increased public awareness, and eventually contributed to change in legislation regarding asylums in Britain. Their findings also directly impacted Haslam. He was responsible for implementing the unfair treatment, so when Bedlam was exposed, the blame fell on him. Consequently, Haslam was dismissed from his position as Bedlam's apothecary and was left financially ruined. His reputation was destroyed, and he was forced to sell his entire library to survive. Haslam's downfall was directly caused by his own mistreatment of Matthews. And even though Matthews didn't live to see it, Haslam eventually got the punishment that he so rightfully deserved. Matthews was the first fully documented psychiatric patient and is considered to be the earliest recorded case of schizophrenia. There were certainly cases of schizophrenia before his, but none were equal to what he experienced. Previously, schizophrenics reported delusions involving spirits or divine communication. Matthews, however, believed a machine was controlling his mind. It was the first example of the influencing machine, a concept that would later become a recurring theme among schizophrenics. In 1919, Victor Tausk, an associate of Sigmund Freud, published an article called On the Origin of the Influencing Machine in Schizophrenia. The article details several patients who believed their thoughts were controlled by a machine that secretly influenced them from a distance. Today, the idea of the influencing machine is relatively mainstream. As trust in authority continues to decline, segments of the population have developed theories regarding various methods of control. 5G and vaccines are modern-day examples of the Air Loom, with the government serving as the Air Loom Gang. A concept once isolated to the mind of a single man has now permeated society and gained widespread acceptance. Matthews lived an unfair life, having spent at least 20 of his 45 years confined in prisons or asylums. But he left behind a positive legacy. Despite the hardships he endured, he was remembered as a kind, gentle man who only spoke poorly of others if they had done so toward him first. It's unknown why Haslam harbored such resentment toward Matthews. Perhaps he felt threatened, as Matthews was a well-educated man. Or maybe Haslam was acting under orders from a higher authority to keep him confined. But I think the nature of Matthews' relationship with Haslam was perfectly described by Mike Jay, a British author and historian. He wrote, quote, "Might we not conclude that the heirloom was ultimately not just Matthews' creation, but Haslam's too? Haslam was ambitious to become a specialist mad doctor, and thus had a profound and personal need to manifest appropriate specimens of madness. Matthews remained a peacemaker. The accounts of Bedlam's staff stressed that he was always striving to resolve conflicts. But Haslam, by insisting on imposing his will on patients, made such resolutions impossible. The heirloom, perhaps, was not merely the product of Matthews' unconscious mind, but of Haslam's too, forced into existence to satisfy the doctor's unacknowledged needs and desires. Matthews recorded that the Air Loom Gang frequently referred to him as their talisman, the key to their plan of world domination. But Matthews was equally Haslam's talisman, the doctor's secret weapon in his own grand schemes.